verse of Amazing Grace. It's on the back of your bulletins. This is a wonderful turnout, and there's more people here than I printed bulletins, and I printed about 67 of them. So thank you. Mike, if you will hit, or Mike Handy, if you'll hit start on this, or get it back to the beginning.
Oh, restart.
Restart. Okay. Who's a good choir master? I think we'll probably quit at verse 1 since we're running just a little bit behind and we don't have the professionals here to lead it for us. Several years ago, at a Memorial Day picnic, two typical troublemakers, Tom Vaughn and Dan King, looked at each other and said, "Why aren't we doing a ceremony here in the Cold Spring Cemetery?" So that Monday, we had a ceremony. We had maybe 6 or 8 people, and it has grown. We have identified currently about 56 or 57 veterans, and every time we pick up the corner of something and look, we find more veterans here, ranging from the Revolutionary War through Vietnam. This ceremony, you see us in the colonial outfits and the Civil War outfits. We had promises of people from World War I and World War II to be here. They had to back out due to work requirements, some of which was caused by the storms that we've had that have knocked down power lines, and they're working every minute of the day they're awake. So, don't pay attention to the uniforms. We are here to honor everybody. This year is the 100th anniversary of the year the United States entered World War I. It was an absolutely brutal war, trench warfare. Machine guns were active. They lost people to foot rot, to frostbite. It was absolutely miserable. We have 2 identified people here in our cemetery from World War I. And each will get a mention. It is our duty to remember all veterans. So as you hear, if you hear of any veterans that we do not have listed, and I've got extra copies up here and found a correction this morning already, let us know and we'll research it. Pappy Hawthorne is going to do a special recognition for John Stanton King, buried up here on the top of the hill.
Camp 52, Sons of Confederate Veterans, started a campaign a couple of years ago to mark Confederate soldiers' graves who were a part of what is known as the Immortal 600. John Stanton King happened to be one of those. Now, hopefully, when all the ceremony is over, we have installed a medallion plaque on his stone up there. We hope most of you will come up with us and view this. It took us almost a year and a half to raise enough money to buy the plaques and some of the stones. This is our 4th dedication so far of Immortal 600 gentlemen. And we know, according, like Tom was saying, the best we can tell, there is 9 Confederate soldiers buried up there somewhere in that hill. We were able to find 3 of them this morning and know where a 4th one is, but some of the others, we may have to really do some hunting to find them. But you want to know why we put this plaque on John King's stone versus some of the other fellows? I want to give you a quick rundown of why we done this. John was in the 37th Virginia. He was in and out several times during the war with sickness and so forth. But the 37th was part of Stonewall Jackson's foot cavalry, as they called them, and were in some of the toughest fights in Virginia. Unfortunately, John was captured along with several hundred of the 37th at Spotsylvania Courthouse near the end of the war. He was sent from there to Point Lookout prison camp, and from there to Fort Delaware. And then at Fort Delaware, they had a lottery drawing. And John, like everybody else, was hoping his name was going to be drawn, and it was. They drew out 600 officers. Fort Delaware was primarily a Confederate officers' prison camp, thinking that they were going to be exchanged. Unfortunately, they loaded them on an old steam train, all 600 of them in the hold of this ship, and took them to Morris Island, South Carolina. They stayed on this cramped up, tight ship for 19 days at sea. They said that every man there was sick, and down in this hole, you can imagine what a filthy, nasty mess this ended up being. And the Union captain refused to clean the ship, made them stay in their filth. After 19 days, they were landed there at Morris Island and put in a pen. They were used as human shields. They were put in front of the Union artillery, hoping and thinking that the Confederates would cease fire and not fire into their own people. They were smart enough, they just elevated their guns and shot over them. While they were on the ship, they were given 3 hardtack crackers a day and a cup of water to survive. Some of them didn't. When they got to Morris Island, there in Charleston Harbor, their rations were not a whole lot better. They said they were given 4 hardtack crackers of a morning and a cup of soup of the evening. They said it was supposed to be bean soup, and one day one guy actually found a bean. 13 of them succumbed to this tough situation there. And they were kept there for 3 or 4 weeks, constantly under fire. Luckily, none of them were killed by friendly fire. When the Union realized this wasn't going to work, they loaded John and the rest of the fellows that was remaining up and took them down to a place called Fort Pulaski, an old fort down on the Savannah River. They were put in prison there and treated as prisoners, and then their ration became a cup of rotten cornmeal, which had been ground in 1861, most of it, and several pickles each day. That was their ration. Naturally, a lot of fellows succumb to this, diarrhea, dysentery, everything that you could imagine. One thing that did save him, and I'm sure John was among them, since he came back home, they said that the fort was overrun with cats and rats. But when these fellows left there after 63 days of imprisonment in that prison, they said there was neither cat nor rat in that prison. And some of the fellows, I know Fulkerson for one, who's over at East Hill, somebody asked him, "Did you eat cat?" He said, "I'm alive, aren't I?" No doubt maybe John did too. But they were returned to Fort Delaware then, and most of them were kept on beyond the surrender date. They tried to fatten them up because the government itself was ashamed of the shape these men were in. But John survived it and came back home and lived here in this valley and is buried up there. When the ceremony's over and all, we hope you will journey, some of you up there with us, to see the medallion we have placed on John's grave, because he deserves a special honor for what he went through.
Melissa, we have the honor of having the granddaughter of one of our World War I veterans to tell a few things about Arthur Comer.
I hardly know what to say. I was just found out I was doing this last night late. And unfortunately, I know very little about my grandfather. He died when my mother even was 15. So very few stories of the man, other than I know he had to have a good sense of humor since he was married to my grandmother, Mabel Comer. That's a necessity, I'd say. Here to honor him and happy to do so. He served in World War I, was enlisted at age 24 and assigned to the 163rd Infantry in France. He's a member of Cold Spring Presbyterian Church and the Masonic Lodge in Abingdon. He did not die in battle, but his early death makes me suspect that many of these men were exposed to all kinds of horrible chemicals and in war, so you never really know how many you lose subsequent to other exposures. Sorry about that. He did work for Standard Oil, and I found in his belongings last night a World Pacific Arena map that he got from SO. I guess they published it so people could see where their relatives were and where Guam was and Okinawa and all the places that the men fought. And they had an interesting little advertisement or information on the back I'd like to read to you. It said, along with every man who goes overseas, go also 12 tons of equipment. 8 of these are petroleum in some form, fuel oil for fighting ships and landing barges, synthetic rubber tires for trucks and jeeps. I'm not sure how to pronounce this. Toluene for bombs, 100-octane gasoline for fighting planes and bombers. To those 8 tons of munitions made of petroleum, add 4 made of steel, cotton, paper, and food and wool raised on the farms and ranches of America. Yet without the man, those supplies are useless. Superior equipment and supplies help make his job a little easier, but only he makes victory certain. And lastly, to those 58,000 people of my generation that went to Vietnam, I'd like to say an honor for them as well.
Thank you. World War I was so brutal. Arthur Comer went over to Europe under General Pershing. You may have heard of his name. He was in the thick of the fighting there with the gases, the mustard gases and so forth. It was so horrendous that the Geneva Convention has outlawed the use of chemical weaponry, and that ban is mostly observed even until today. You'll see just a bit about Jeb Kelly. He is our other known World War I vet. We did a program on him last year. Now, he later became a judge in life, so I will leave it to your imagination. He managed to enlist in the Canadian Expeditionary Forces when he was 15 years old. He was born in Tazewell, Virginia, claimed to have been born in Canada, and claimed that he was 20 years old when he joined. Good, honest judge. Aggie, would you come talk about Miss Grace Darter?
For those of us that grew up in the community, we knew Miss Grace. I think even some of the next generation down, because she didn't die until 1993, and she was 95. Miss Grace was born in Virginia. Somewhere along the line, they moved to Greenville, Tennessee, the family. She had 3 brothers and a sister. One of her brothers is who started Darter's store. He ran that store for years and years and years, and that is how Miss Grace ended up in this community. She joined the Women's Army Corps in 1943, and according to Sue Vaughn and Mary Lou Fleener and a few of the others, Miss Grace never married because the love of her life was killed in World War II, so she didn't ever marry. She came back to, apparently she was in Greenville, and then somehow they got to Ohio. I don't know how that part of it worked out, but she went to Ohio and joined the Army Air Corps there, Women's Army Corps, not the one they call Air. And she was served from 1943 to 1945, and then she came back to the area and lived in this community. She was a florist. She worked for several different florists in the area apparently over the years, but us in the church knew Miss Grace for her flowers and her gracious attitude. It fit her name. She was a really sweet lady. I think that I know Mary and Suzanne, all of us grew up looking up to Miss Grace. So we honor her and appreciate her service. There wasn't many women. I don't know if we had any others in the church that served in the service. So we're going to honor Miss Grace today.
Mike Clark. Mr. Don Evans is one of our most recent unfortunate additions to Cold Spring Cemetery. He had wanted to be buried with military honors, so we will do military honors today for him.
As Tom said, Don is a recent departure. God blessed us with a man of service in Don Evans. He was born in 1921, died this past September, and he has had 95 years here. I don't know that much about Don's early life. He was raised in Woodville, Alabama, which is not far from Chattanooga, and Huntsville, Alabama. But, for a timeline, by his, growing up in the teens, World War II was starting to get nasty. There was the oil embargo against Japan that had happened. Germany had invaded Poland. And he knew he was going to be right in the thick of things. Didn't know what he was going to do. But Don was a man of service. Just like Christ was here on earth. That's what Christ preached. He taught us, he brought us the good news, but his command to us was serve others. And I can't think of another guy that I know that served others like Don Evans. He joined the Merchant Marines on his when he was 18 years old, And he was there, and those that know a little bit about Merchant Marines, that's the supply force. They're the transporters. And sometimes, and also, it was probably the most dangerous job in the war. They had the highest casualty rate of all the military. But he did that for a couple of years, and then he went active in the Navy. And as Mr. Comer was mentioned, working with Standard Oil, the first ship he served on was owned by Standard Oil. It was the USS Signal. And the Standard Oil, when it was serving in the World War I time, it was known as the Arrow, USS Arrow. But Don was basically on a floating gasoline can running into the Pacific, battling the Japanese. Don probably didn't know what his role was going to be, but he took it on, and God has a way of using our talents. We may not know what our talents are, but Don was excellent at preparation, planning, inventory, a heck of a cook. And if anybody knows anything about military service, the winning army is usually the best fed army. If you are mobilized and you don't have your supply lines in the energy to fight, ask Lenin and Napoleon what can happen. So my hat's off to Don. He stayed in the Navy. He served on many ships. And while he was in California for a while, early. Then he was in Florida. He served in the Caribbean, running back and forth through Trinidad, Puerto Rico on ships. And then he was stationed in the Norfolk area, where one of his buddies took him on a leave to come to Holston Valley, and he met Bonnie Monroe Arnold. And they married in 1954, which was the year I was born. And after a distinguished career in the Navy, he served for 25 years, I believe, and he retired. He wasn't done serving. He came to this area, built his home, and was a cook at Mountain Home in Johnson City for the Veterans Administration. He served there. Then he went to the Forestry Service and served there as the head cook at the Job Corps Center. All in all, Don served over 50 years. What a man of service. I was so privileged to get to know Don, his love for the church, for this community, for all the folks. He was a wonderful father. He was a great husband, and he was just one of the kindest, most gentle, giving and serving men I know. And I think it's very appropriate that Taps is played for Don Evans today. Well, I never will forget a scout service. The civil service too. Dan's talking about the scouts. Those of us who were smart scouts, you can tell by the size of their waistline. If you went on a camping trip, you better be close to Don Evans' tent, because that was definitely the best grub in town. And his kids, both of them were Eagle Scouts. I went through the scouting program with both of them. I wish they were here, but they're not. They both live in Bristol. But Don Evans, he never broke loose from this community. And I'm so glad and honored to be able to speak for him.
Mike, thank you.
Yes, sir.
We have a bouquet of flowers to put on each one of the World War I, World War II, and graves, and a blue flower for John Stanton. Jay has a master list. If any family would like a flag, Dan, flags? Dan's got flags now. Jay has a master list, so just see Jay. Scouts are going to place flags on all of the graves while the names of those known are read here. Families, see Jay to get your name marked off so the scouts don't try to put a second flag on there or beat you to it, because they're good at putting flags on graves. Pat?
Howard R. Bob Baines. Samuel Baines. Robert B. Bratzel. Tivis J. Browning. Thomas Pemberton Biggs. John W. Bud Clark. Bill Comerford. Arthur R. O. Comer. J. Rutledge Cowan. Hogue Cumby. Grace Darter. Herman Jameson Dees. Joseph R. Bobby Delaney Jr. Joseph R. Delaney. Frank Cleveland Dorman Jr. Charles Rayburn Elliott. Chesley Donald Evans. Gerald P. Dunlap. Richard M. Graham. James Craig Gray. Moses Gray. James E. Jeb Kelly. Edwin David Kessner. Clyde Cowan King. John Stanton King. John Thomas King. Leander E. King. Samuel D. King. Theophilus Thomas King. William Razor King. Aubrey Lee Kaiser Jr. James Duff Lowry. Gene Malone. Sherman McClellan. Joseph A. McDaniel. Jack C. McPherson. William King Billy Morrell. John Pemberton. Thomas Dryden Pemberton. Lester W. Petrie. Jerry Pope. Joe Poore. Charles Pyle. Arthur L. Rutherford. Melvin G. Rohr. Everett Keith Smith Sr. Joseph Thomas Smith. Parkus E. Sutherland. Robert Hal Tallman. Joe Keller Thomas III. John Barry Thomas. Nathan G. Thomas. Thomas Joseph Watt. James Edwin Withers. William Edward Withers. Donald E. Wampler. Elbert Melvin Woodby.
I'm going to read a poem that was made rather famous during World War I. called In Flanders Fields. It's a sad poem, but it reflects what happened during that era. In Flanders Fields, the poppies blow between the crosses, row by row, that mark our place, and in the sky, the larks still bravely singing fly. Scarce heard amidst the guns below, we are dead. Short days ago, we lived, felt drawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe, to you from our failing hands. We throw the torch, be yours to hold it high. If you break faith with us, who died, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields. Unfortunately, World War I was supposed to be the war that ended all wars. As we are familiar, it didn't. So subsequent generations have had to take up the torch and hold it high. In your bulletin, who will stand for these fallen? Who will remember for all times?
We will stand. We will remember.
Thank you. Pappy, when it's clear, would your company do the honors, please, over Mr. Evans' grave?
Order, order. Parade, dismissed. Stand with the
Thank you. This concludes our program for today. Thanks all who came out. If next year you have any particular veteran that you would like for us to do a story or present or honor, please let us know. Because hopefully we will keep doing this for a long time. We are one of the very few small cemeteries that we know of that do a program. I think East Hills did one.
Saturday.
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 And the VA in Johnson City.
Today.
And I don't know of any other small cemeteries that do anything like this. So thank you for your support. Thank you for attending. And meet some of your ancestors up here and say hi to them.
Thank you.